Hi, how are ya? Welcome back to Say More Words. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Tamika Taylor, and I am so excited that you're here. Today's song of the day is a shout out to Autozone for just an absolute banger of a jingle. Get in the zone, Autozone. I want there to be an ow at the end of that. Is there? I don't know. If there isn't, Autozone, call me. I'll do it for you. That's not the song of the day, but it's just a small shout out. Song of the day is actually the Affirmation Song by Snoop Dogg. Well, it's actually Doggyland is the group name. It's Snoop Dogg and some group of people who created kids rap songs. And the Affirmation Song is a hit. Okay, it's a banger, and I listen to it on the way to school with my kids every morning, and I think you should too. So that's our song of the day. Our topic of the day is getting in the zone, but not the AutoZone. We're just getting in the zone. You've heard me say it a couple of times, and I've actually gotten a lot of questions about it. So I, was talking with my team. What should I talk about? What should I not talk about? Whatever. They're like, you need to talk about Zone of Genius. Because I've said it so many times in the past podcast that it's time, right? It's time for us to have this discussion. So when I learned about the Zone of Genius, gosh, it was probably like 10 years ago, maybe less than that. It completely changed. Actually, it was less than that. And here's why I know it was less than that. It was about 7 years ago. I learned about the Zone of Genius because I was pregnant with my daughter. I was working a corporate job, wasn't my favorite environment, wasn't my favorite experience. But while I was there, I knew I wasn't going to stay there forever. But while I was there, I did what I like to call Tamika University, or old school university. And so I just started learning on my own instead of having to go to a university. I started learning on my own different things that I thought I needed to know to get to the next level. And at that time, I didn't know what my Zone of Genius was. So I had been given the book by a friend actually that I worked out with. She had given me the book The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. It's a tiny little book. It's got a fish jumping out of a fishbowl on the front, but the book is powerful. And Gay Hendricks talks about the zones of genius, and that there's 4 zones of genius, or 4 zones that we can survive in, or that we can live in. And when you can find your true zone of genius, aka your life's purpose, what you are here for, you are just a much happier person. And so I read this book and I was like, holy cow, and it really was the snowball into finding and growing deeper into myself to figure out who it was that I was meant to be when I grew up. So let me tell you a little bit about the zones though. Okay, so we'll start there. There's 4 zones. 1, there's the zone of incompetence. And we all have these zones, right? And if you are listening to this and you're kind of a visual person, whenever I work on tasks or, when I was working on who I wanted to be, I put it in a quadrant, okay? And in the upper left-hand quadrant, I did the zone of incompetence. The zone of incompetence is activities that other people are way better than you are, okay? Zone of incompetence. Like, you could do it, but they're way better. Like, I'm not a plumber, and I'm also not going to fix my car. There are people out there whose zone of genius is that. It is not mine. Zone of incompetence. So when I look at, and one of the things that I'm doing right now, if you're listening to this in December, or if you're listening to this at any point in the year, December though, we're getting close to December, and it's about that point where people start looking at their goals. And one of the things I look at are my zones of incompetence, competence, excellence, and genius, and see what worked for me this year and what I don't want to bring with me next year. In my zone of incompetence, every year I learn something that I am not that good at, and somebody else would be better to do it than me. And even though I have control issues sometimes, I have to sit down in an honest space and be like, these things I'm not good at. Fair, okay? Zone of competence. Those are the activities that you can do, but others are just as good as you when you do them, right? So it's like competence. I can do those things. I can clean my house. I can wash my car. I can take my dogs to appointments. I can answer emails. I can, I can be a human. Basically, the zone of competences are activities that you can do, and you can do them well, and others can also do them, right? So it's like you're mediocre, whatever. Like, if we all had the same strengths, we would all be living in the zone of competence. Okay. Zone of excellence are these activities that you are really good at and better than most people at doing. You just don't love doing them. So you're really good at it. It's just not your favorite thing on the planet. I'm going to tell you, I love drafting a word. I do. I love talking. I love writing. I love all of that. But I don't love it all of the time. So it's not in my zone of excellence all of the time. But it's your zone of excellence. Like, you're really good at it. People praise you for it all the time. It's just not your favorite. It's just not your favorite thing to do. And here's the sweet spot. Okay. Oh, and I didn't even tell you. I'm so sorry. Upper left-hand quadrant is the zone of incompetence. Right-hand quadrant, upper left or upper right, is the zone of competence. The lower left hand is the zone of excellence. And what we want to get to is the lower right-hand corner. And that is your zone of genius. These are activities that you are damn good at, right? Like, people praise you all the time for being so good at these things. In the world, people see you in a high regard in that space. And here's the kicker. You love doing them. They bring you joy. It's passion. Like, when you start doing it, time disappears. Things don't make sense. Like, each day flies by because you love what you're doing. That is your zone of genius. And what's really funny is that people will stick to their zone of competence and their zone of excellence, even sometimes their zone of incompetence, because it's safe there. It's safe to be in the place of like things that you are okay at, but you just don't like. It is the people who are passionate about what they do, who are crazy about what they do, who are really good at what they do, and they talk about it and they praise about it and all these different things. It's those people that are seen as crazy. They're like seen as crazy people, right? Because here's the deal. When you're inside the zone of genius, there is this unbelievable lightness. Everything makes sense. And everything, it just moves so efficiently inside of the place of your zone of genius. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, cool. How do I find my zone of genius? I love going through this activity with people and trying to find their zone of genius because people want to find it right away, right? Like, I need to know it right away. But really, it's an activity to kind of walk through. Like I said, when I got the book, it was 2017. My daughter was brand new. And I had this ping in my heart that I needed to figure out what I wanted to be and who I wanted to be as a human, because I didn't want my daughter to grow up with a mom who hated herself. Because what ends up happening is moms who hate themselves say not nice things to their kids sometimes. Not intentionally, but they do. And then it sticks and then it stays. And then we have limiting beliefs and all these things stuck in our subconscious. I wanted my daughter to grow up with a mom who was happy more often than not, who looked at the brighter side of things, who looked for solutions instead of problems, who didn't want to stay a victim. Like, I wanted my daughter to be so good. And I knew in order to raise a really good, strong human, I needed to do something with myself. Okay. So I'm working in a job that I'm really good at it. I can do an Excel sheet. I can send an email. I can schmooze with the best of them. But I wasn't happy. And my husband said something one day. He goes, "It doesn't matter if you're happy, you have to have a job." And, it's one of those things where people say it like that kind of statement, it sticks with you. And when people say something like that, at least for me, I'm like, bet. I can find a place in which I'm happy and also have a job where I'm happy and make money. And I had this just like passion, this thing deep down inside. If you have not seen the movie Soul by Pixar, I highly suggest you watch it, because that movie talks a lot about, finding that passion, finding that zone. So while I was working this corporate job, you don't have to be happy. You just need to make money. Okay, great. What can I do that would make me happy and make me money? And I will tell you that before I even figured it out, I quit my job. I don't highly suggest that to people. I mean, this is about a year later. I don't suggest it. But sometimes when your values are pushed, sometimes that's the best option. And for me at that point, it was the best option for me. Scary for my family, but one of the best options and things. We made it, but it was a decision that I had to make in order to find where I was going. Anyways, I found that I am the happiest when I'm talking, right? So I know I said like in my zone of excellence talking and stuff like that. It's not the talking that's not a problem. It's the, like having to post regularly. It's the social media aspect of the world. That's not my favorite. That's not where my zone of excellence is. But my zone of genius is talking and writing and seeing people for who they truly are and activating people to be better and communicating, obviously talking, and focusing on what is happening in the now and asking the hard questions that people like to avoid to get to deeper understanding and to create explosive matters. And in the corporate job that I was in, I was never going to do that. I was never going to do that in the environment that I was in. And so when I found my zone of genius, it was when I was sitting one-on-one guiding somebody to enhance themselves, to enhance their business. As soon as I figured that out, my days became short. My nights became short. Life all of a sudden started to fly by because I was living in this space of who can I help next? How can I help the next person? All of a sudden, even though I'm not saying that inside of the zone of genius, it's all sunshine and rainbows. What I am telling you is that there are hard days, but those hard days are doable because I love what I do. Oftentimes, the zone of genius is seen as something that is like pushed away. A lot of times when I'm working with zone of genius people, or when I'm working with people on their zone of genius, I'm looking at like, what were you told you could not do in the past? What were you told was just a fantasy? What were you told that you could never bring to fruition? Because oftentimes we're told those things by people who don't have that passion deep down inside of us. And they also don't have the ability to make those things come true like you potentially could. So like sitting and thinking about like, what is it that you do every day that lights your ass on fire? Then start running towards that. What are you super passionate about? What could you talk about for days on end? And I'm not saying talk on a stage. I'm just saying if I sat you down and I started asking you questions, what would you want to talk about? And everybody's zone of genius is different, okay? Mine is helping people find their true unique selves so that they can explode. I have friends whose zone of genius is building large machinery and finding out how to supply things in a more efficient way. I have friends whose zone of genius lie in what different chemical properties need to exist to keep this human alive while they're going through surgery. I have friends whose passion is creating a healthier world by adjusting people and making sure that they seek alternative forms of healthcare in order to seek health as opposed to seek sickness. I have friends who, I mean, it's like highs and lows, right? There's so many different things. I have friends who are the most beautiful graphic designers, and I can't even imagine the way that their brains work to get from point A to point B on a creative aspect. It's crazy. But inside of our zone of genius, we are so strong in who we are, and we show up authentically as ourselves every single time. And that's why it feels easy. There's less resistance. It's more of a flow. And even though the days go fast and even though hard times happen, the flow is consistent and exists inside of your zone of genius. And so it doesn't have to be as deep as helping people, because people get stopped up in that, okay? It doesn't have to be that deep. It can be, well, I've always been interested in this. How can I work inside of this? I've always been I've got a friend who is so good at Excel sheets. So good at Excel sheets. And her ass lights on fire if she has to make an Excel sheet because it's her favorite thing on the planet. Zone of genius for her. Loves them. Would do them all day. Okay? Like, so sit and think inside of your zone of genius, like if you didn't have to eat, it's that question, if you didn't have to get paid, what would you be doing? If you could just exist doing something, what would those things be? And it doesn't have to be just one thing. You don't have to be stuck in one thing in your zone of genius, but looking at, time, space, nothing matters. What does your zone of genius look like? What are you going to do? How are you going to show up in the world? Simple as that. The zone of genius is what lights your ass on fire. And you could talk about it all day. And you can see it in your eyes, that twinkle in your eyes. Like, if you want to get me riled up, let's talk about somebody not talking nicely to themselves and what we can do to fix it, or how to change somebody's business, or how to change the relationship. All day. It's my favorite party trick to just sit and talk about it. So, like, what is yours? What could you do? And if you aren't doing that today, how can you find it more in your day? Or you can find people to delegate the things that are not in your zone of genius so that you can work more in your zone of genius. And you don't have to be a small business owner in order to follow this. You could work for somebody else. But I'm sure there's things you do in your day-to-day life that you're like, this is not in my zone of genius. And if I could just do my zone of genius more, I would make this company so much more money. Or I would make so much more money. It was a really hard realization as somebody who is wildly independent, doesn't really like to rely on people, when I realized that my business could only go as far as I could focus on my zone of genius. Meaning, if I kept doing things inside of my space of my zone of incompetence or my zone of competence, or hell, even my zone of excellence, I was not living enough inside of my zone of genius. And if that was the case, then I could not help as many people as I need to inside of my zone of genius. So anything that's not inside of my zone of genius, I had to hire this year in order to stay in my zone of genius. I had to hire all other 3 zones of people who are really good at those things and much better than me, who could do them more efficiently. The big thing, everyone's like, it's so good to see like business is going well and things seem to be exploding and your life seems so great. It is. My life is great and business is exploding and I get to help more people. And I am so very thankful that I get to help more people. The only reason why I get to help more people and I get to help you and I get to talk to you every week is because I've hired people to do my zone of incompetence, my zone of competence, and my zone of excellence work that I am not good at, but they are. It's their zone of genius. They're awesome at it and they love doing it. And guess what? They're more efficient and it's great. So I want you to sit and think about it as you're getting ready to end this year, or if you're listening to this and it's not the end of the year, maybe it's the middle of a quarter, maybe it's the middle of a month, maybe you're beginning to end a career and change over or try something new. Whatever it is that you're doing when you're listening to this podcast, I want you to sit and think, what is my zone of genius? How can I live in that space more? How could that change my life, change my family's life, change the relationships around me? If I lived in my zone of genius, what would I offload to make life easier? Because I'm telling you, inside of the zone of genius, this place, it's cute, right? It's decorated nice. There's glitter everywhere, at least inside of my zone of genius, right? It's comfortable. And the days go by so quickly and you wish you could have more time so you could do more of what you're really good at. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating world to be in. So make your quadrants and think about like, what are your different quadrants? Your zone of incompetence, your zone of competence, your zone of excellence, and your zone of genius. What are they? And work and strive in 2024 to spend more time inside of your zone of genius than any other zone. So that's the word for today, boo-boo. I hope you take this to heart. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on any of my social media, Instagram or Facebook. I'm at the Tamika Taylor, or on Instagram, we also have a podcast Instagram of at Say More Words Podcast. If you need help with some Zone of Genius work, reach out. I promise you, though, it's the best work you will ever do in your whole life. So next time when you hear me say zone of genius, you're in the know. So I hope you have a great day, great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye, y'all.